Hello and welcome to this episode of the Digital Disruption podcast, brought to you by Novus Strategy and Consulting. On February the 9th, the UK government announced plans to modernise the home buying and selling process, promising to vastly improve the pace and speed with which people transact in the UK today. Welcome to this episode of the Digital Disruption podcast, brought to you by Novus Strategy and Consulting with Pete Gatenby and myself, Chris Williams. Today, we're going to be exploring the government announcement and exactly what it means to the ecosystem.
So, February the 9th, big day in our industry.
Yes.
For anyone who may have been under a rock for the last couple of weeks, should we just give them a quick overview about what was announced and what's coming down the track for our space?
Yeah, so this was the UK government's announcement, essentially setting out that they're going to modernise the home buying and selling process, is essentially what they were saying. And essentially what they've come out with is to say, look, we're going to look at certain key aspects of the process, whether that's through the digitisation of data. We're going to launch some pilots, and we're going to work closely with HMLR and local government, so local councils, to look at how we can introduce higher levels of digitisation in order to almost start this process of modernisation, which, you know, with the greatest of respect to the announcement, we know isn't the start of a modernisation process. We've been in a modernisation process for quite some time. But at a high level, that was essentially what was announced. And of course, as ever, that sent debate flying, shall we say, where we get very, a very clear two sides as to sort of these, very
polarizing.
Yeah, polarizing. That's a great word to use. Polarizing views, some of which, of course, are very much, warm and welcoming, and yet we see this as a great thing, and others sort of just kind of a bit sick and tired of stuff being said and nothing really happening.
So before we get into some of the debate about the do's and the do nots, should we just give a bit of an overview about what was covered, where the focus is going to be, and actually how this is going to manifest itself over the next months and probably years, in truth?
Yeah. I think the first part to look at is the section where they talk about a fully digitised home buying and selling process. Yeah. And that essentially would mean that whether you're, mortgage companies, surveyors, basically have access to information on demand. It's identity checks only carried out once. And essentially what they were saying is that the Ministry in Housing and communities and local governments have said, like, that's how they see this happening. And so if you think about local searches that need to be taking place, they take place in local councils. So a lot of this requires sort of significant steps forward in accepting this new way of working, which is already being looked at and has been looked at for some time. The other parts of this is working with the likes of Land Registry to look at how they can essentially digitise areas of what they do, which in truth, again, a lot of that work is currently underway, but also kind of working in coalitions with the DPMSG, or the Digital Property Market Steering Groups, and working on specific pilots or 12-week projects with sort of coalition groups. So this is really important because whilst in the private sector, a lot of this stuff has been done to actually get government sort of back into some of this, what it does is it will probably likely accelerate some of those pilots. It will also actually highlight where there are some key dependencies and actually some areas what might be deemed to be quite areas of high friction. And what I mean by high friction is that going to take longer than we thought? Is this going to be easier or harder than what we thought? And what does this look like in the real world in terms of working with local councils and whatever else to get this stuff where we need to be? So I see it very positively in that regard.
Yeah, I tend to agree. And look, I know when we initially spoke about this, and we were discussing whether it's a good thing or a bad thing, and we both very much err on the good side of a step forward. But look, could they have done this earlier? Maybe. Is this the right time? Well, it's the second best time than yesterday. So yeah, let's crack on. What I find really interesting is that I actually sort of semi-see this as the government's HDI strategy for the industry as a whole.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of putting it.
Because they are literally trying to horizontally, digitally integrate the entire industry and put an initiative forward in which the industry can grab a hold of, get involved, and start to move some of the areas that were perhaps blocked previously, or at least stumbling blocks for actors in the ecosystem to really get hold of them and perhaps address.
I'd agree with you 100% on that. I think there's two things for me. One is, well, they both come down to impact and what kind of impact it will have. One is what this highlights is the importance of having a HDI strategy, HDI being horizontal digital integration, and what that looks like. The second thing is for me is that there's a lot of, and we've described this in recent webinars and things like that, transformation fatigue in this industry.
Yeah, massively.
And that transformation fatigue comes from lots of announcements, woolly PR campaigns claiming to be a silver bullet to completely transform this market. And the reality is that this market hasn't been digitally mature enough across all of the core component parts to actually enable a step change in the transformation agenda. In that we've been through that vertical transformation, and to move to this horizontal transformation where the ecosystem becomes interoperable and connected. So the second point for me to be clear is that the government does recognise that actually there are the core component elements of this industry have now been got to a level of digital maturity where things can actually begin to move quicker. So they're two big things for me. HDI strategy is clearly there. Second thing is the recognition of the digital maturity. And we can prove that because we, as we do, we regularly do it. We are at a pinnacle moment in this industry sector. So I don't want to kind of jump on an overhyped bandwagon. And this most definitely isn't overhyped, but it could be a bit of a bandwagon for people to overhype it, but be under no uncertain terms. We are at a pinnacle point now, and we will begin to see this progression take place. And the impact is a good and a positive one. And, if we look at it, let's turn to the impact statement, what are the impacts on this industry? Make no bones about it. If we reduce the time it takes to transact on a property in the UK, just put the consumer at the heart of it, that's a lot better for them. On a macroeconomics level, this is like major because the liquidity in market massively increases. If you increase speed and increase liquidity in market in the UK, which, is a massive thing, everything sits off the housing sector pretty much. What that means is that the actors in the process, everybody from the estate agent through to your lenders, through to your broker networks, through to your conveyancers, and everybody in that process gets paid quicker.
Yep.
The capacity increases, the margins go up. Like, this isn't bad for business.
This is good.
For some vendors, they're going to have to look at their business models, because if you're an ID provider and you sell an ID search 7 times, then things might need to change for you. But actually, your accessibility to capacity just got higher. So the impact's big. I've touched on a lot in a short group in there. But that's the biggie for me.
Yeah, and I know we talk about it a lot, and it's a big pet focus of mine. Is like, well, the macro view, because of the impact and it solves a lot of the problems that are talked about in the macroeconomic world. But if we just hone in now specifically, perhaps some of our listeners, we know that there's a lot of listeners out there from lenders, they're from prop techs, from legal tech sometimes, and from conveyancing, large conveyancers. So if we start to hone into some of these actor groups that we know are listening to this, perhaps start with lenders. What's the big impact for lenders?
I think the big impact for lenders was a few things. One is this is a distinct opportunity to begin to look at what happens, not just from an onboarding standpoint for a buyer, because a lot of them have been focused on that onboarding piece. Ash talks about this a lot.
Yeah, he does, yeah.
They've been very focused on onboarding, rightly so to a certain extent, but actually this then leads into the next phase. What can happen almost beforehand, and how does this benefit the buyer? You can actually offer the whole buyer journey can be massively improved, but let's look beyond the here and now. So we know that most lenders want to do 2 things at the moment. One is growth. 2 is simplification, i.e. how do I grow margins, growth now? and what does that look like, and what are the foundations that I need to lay to continue to do that later, especially with interest rate changes and things like that. My profitability, margin growth can come down, so you get impacts on that. And the second thing then is simplification being how do we improve the process and benefit from that later down the line. This is going to do both of those things. You've got the opportunity to hit your margin growth now, and you can do that in a number of different ways. More importantly for me, though, you've got to look at longevity. And I know that's hard trying to balance the two for a lender, but the longevity of this is that we are now paving a way to in-life product servicing. And in-life servicing and in-life offerings, it is like an unknown in this country. And it's a massive opportunity because it comes back to point one, growth.
Yeah.
If you can start to see what's going on and actually do things in life in a mortgage, then, that's big. But in terms of the now, we obviously work in, maybe not obviously, but we tend to talk in the now, next, later themes for lenders. The now bit definitely is a pathway for margin growth, and you can most definitely begin to improve that customer experience and streamline efficiencies massively. And there's lots of quick wins in that there.
No, definitely.
I think the other one is just I guess turning this back round to an area that you do a lot of work in, is how this is going to enable, if you think about the data, AI, and kind of, what they can be doing with that.
Absolutely. I mean, I was having a conversation just this morning on exactly this topic, in the fact that, and this was a more specialised lender that was part of the conversation, and their in-life view is actually more from an intermediary standpoint, but their ability to be able to service them as a human, because they can free up capacity by being more efficient through automation and AI-driven initiatives. Given, and then the exact description was exactly that, which was if we can get our data flowing through the ecosystem much more readily and much more freely, and the validity of that data is vastly increased, then our strategy to service our intermediary network suddenly becomes much more human centric, because they're freed up, their capacity is freed up, and that's only ever going to be drastically move forward given this initiative, which is good news, especially for people who are thinking in those contexts, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Great. So the next part of the process, when we're thinking through that journey of that mortgage journey, that home buying journey, and perhaps the one that is perhaps the longest portion of the journey, is that conveyancing process. It's got a big impact on conveyancers, right? And how they work.
Yeah, I think so. And I think when we talked earlier about polarizing views, when I looked at kind of the chatter around this, and sure you saw it too, it's actually the conveyancing arena where you've got this kind of polarization, where you've got a group sort of, quite frustrated and being blunt, a bit negative. And then you've got another group that, kind of warm welcome, all the rest of it. So let's get into what's the impact for them? What's the opportunities? The truth is, I think the opportunities are the same as what they are for lenders, but just in a slightly different guise. This is going to help streamline things. We've been involved in and seen pilots where upfront information being passed through does make things quicker. You're always going to get cases which are not quicker. You've got a chain in the UK, so it's very difficult to compare to overseas markets that don't have chains. But ultimately, there is going to be benefit here, because if we can digitize things, if we can take a reusable ID, for example, or we digitize parts of the ID or digitize the ID, if we can change the searches, and the searches part of it will be difficult for a law firm, because for a law firm, they may make money on searches. If that's happening somewhere else, then maybe they're not making that revenue anymore. But this is all about innovating and switching your business model to adapt to a better way of working for the end consumer. And I when I talk to conveyancing firms, I don't necessarily see them anti against this. The ones that I certainly have engaged with and talked to see it as a positive thing. But specifically, what it's going to mean for them is the opportunity to focus more on the conveyancing. And I think that that's important. So I'd be definitely embracing this and working and collaborating in the market to figure out my HDI strategy. If I was a conveyancer, what can I be doing with horizontal digital integration to ensure that I'm benefiting from these changes that are inevitably going to come, because if I can, do more cases quicker, faster, safer, better than others and increase my capacity, well, then I'm going to increase my margin growth. And, I think that's definitely going to impact their way of working.
Why are some conveyancers against it then?
Look, I think they're better to answer that than me, but I give my view on it. And my view is that from what I see here, and I've spoken to some people about this, is that it's actually not really to do with the point of digitisation. It's actually to do with the point that so many people wax lyrical about digitisation is going to solve everything, but they're saying it's not. There's a workflow here that actually either, just because you take information further down the line up here, we've still got to do X, Y, Z here. And that doesn't necessarily mean that things are going to change. So the frustration, I think, again, comes down to that fatigue of constantly being browbeaten with, you're the problem, this magic wand of digital is going to fix everything. And it ain't that simple. In response to that kind of rhetoric, I think, most people would agree that, that's not going to be the case. But equally, the conveyancing area has got to evolve. And I think there's a lot of people in the market that see that it's going to evolve.
Yeah. And I think my counter argument to that stance, and the reason I'm much more confident after the 9th of February announcement, is that the conveyancing process is so rule-based. It's never something that gets simplified. Every time a new set of rules are introduced, they never remove a line of rules in the conveyancing handbook. I know it's a fictitious thing, but that process that conveyancers go through, it never gets simpler, because every time a rule's added, there's another element of work they've got to do. It's a heavily regulated and regulated market that we're in. But now that the government's set this initiative and set this direction, I'd like to think, and I might be being over optimistic here, but I'd like to think that some of those optimization that can be made in the process may now be driven from above. And so the conveyancing process could actually become simpler. And so, I mean, I'm speculating, I'm highly speculating, but I would like to think, and the optimist in me says that actually this is a good thing. And those skeptics who are perhaps saying, well, we've heard all this before. Well, yeah, we have heard all this before. We've all heard of new technologies coming in or new processes that are coming in. But this is the first time that we've had a clear directive from the government that's going to say, actually, this is the new way. And so I see it as a call to arms for the industry.
Mm-hmm. Do you know what would be dead interesting? I'm just saying this out of the top of my head, and maybe we could try and figure this out over the next few weeks. We should get conveyancer for, conveyancer against, and a lender, and we should facilitate that conversation, because actually it'd be good to see it from all sides, but we'll maybe consider that one and how that could work.
Yeah, you might have just put something onto our marketing team that's the next event.
I think the final bit for me would be, I think we've touched on sort of challenges and considerations, here a little bit, but I think challenges overall for the market, what would I say are some of those challenges? I think overall it's going to be that collaboration piece. Collaboration is easier said than done in some instances.
Definitely.
You've got to lean into this. There's a lot of changes still happening, whether it's interest rates, all the different actor groups. The day-to-day still got to get done. But I think the challenges are, is to, where possible, is to put time aside for innovating around this. And a big invitation for me is to, wherever you sit in the ecosystem, is start to think about this stuff, start to think about the HDI strategy, which I know is, a key topic for us in what our next episode is, kind of what are HDI strategies and what do they look like. But they'd be the big consideration for me to kind of progress people on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just to build on that a little bit, this is a directive from the government. It's on their radar. It's coming. We've talked about it coming down the track for some time now. Now I think we'd be foolish to suggest that it's not going to happen now, given it's on the government's plan.
Absolutely, 100%. Look, it's there's so many different activities, digital activities that are happening now, from settlement and lodgement all the way up to the data piece at the start, pilots. There's loads happening. It's all just going to gradually fall together now.
Yeah.
The timing around that coming together will remain to be seen. But, the next 2 to 3 years, we're going to see some significant changes.
I agree.
So that concludes this episode of the Digital Disruption podcast. If there's anything in this episode, as ever, that you'd like to have a conversation with us about, don't hesitate to reach out. But for now, thanks for tuning in. Don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe, and we'll see you again next time.
Thanks a lot.